Thank you to EDOTCO and my colleagues at the GSMA for bringing us all together here to discuss a very important topic. I think it's the right stuff and the right time to talk about digital infrastructure. There are a confluence of many different technologies: digitalization, 5G, machine learning, AI, and of course, digital cities. Today I'm going to look at the issue of digital infrastructure from the angle of cities, and I do that for one reason, one primary reason, that is, if we want to untangle this complex landscape, we have to really look at a unit of analysis that is a bit more easy to look at, rather than kind of the entire 5G, digital, and vertical landscape. So why am I talking about cities? Why are they important? I think there are three reasons why cities are important. So the first one is cities are the gravitational center of people. According to the United Nations, by 2025, 2 in 3 people will be living in cities. Across Asia, more than 100,000 people are being added to the Asia's urban population every day. So this is the trend of urbanization. Number 2, cities are important economic engines from both generation of GDP contributions as well as innovation. If we consider the kind of greater KL area, the GDP per capita is just over $10,000 US, and there are 32 million people in that area. So it's really a very massive contributor in terms of economic growth and job generation to the Malaysian economy. And number 3, cities are critical to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 11 specifically focuses on the sustainability of cities and communities, and digital cities are also critical to meet at least 4 other SDG goals. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear that we need to make our cities digital, connected, efficient, and sustainable. We have to build a digital infrastructure layer on top of the physical assets we have in our cities and communities. You might be thinking that the aspiration for making digital city is not new. There have been a number of smart city initiatives. We looked at 350 such initiatives across the world. What we found out that the complexity and scale of these initiatives are at a very early stage. Only 20% of smart city initiatives have reached more than 10% of the population, despite a large number of trials, public funding, and funding through various other private parties. And we identified a number of roadblocks onto the path of digitalizing cities. Roadblock number 1, building an ecosystem. I mean, we heard today many people talking about collaboration and cooperation and partnerships to build 5G. If you want to build a digital city, you need to bring together a large number of private entities, governments, and people. And that is really a difficult challenge. Roadblock number 2, the socio-economic case for building digital cities is very compelling. However, because it is an ecosystem, the individual value for each party can be really at the very micro level. So the macro case is there, but the micro level at the individual business entity level probably doesn't exist. So if I can illustrate that with an example. If you look at a city of just over maybe 1.5 million people, which is roughly the Kuala Lumpur, you can generate more than 350 million per year in direct and indirect benefits. But of course, the most of the benefits are intangible indirect benefits. So for example, take smart traffic management. The benefits of congestion management are in terms of convenience, carbon dioxide reduction, etc. And these are difficult to monetize. The same challenge the 5G ecosystem faces when it comes to monetizing the opportunities in the B2B and vertical space. Roadblock number 3 is the complexity of data analytics. The combination of digital infrastructure, the data that's generated as part of that infrastructure, and the analytics and the AI on top of it, it what really generates the value. And it is, as we know, for both due to concerns around data privacy, concerns around who uses my data, and the difficulty and technical challenges of building an analytics layer make it a challenge as well. And roadblock number 4, a lack of infrastructure deployment at scale. If you really want to build a digital city which has sensors, densified mobile base stations, fiberized connectivity, or some other advanced backhaul connectivity, it requires a significant degree of investment. Let me turn to 5G, the connectivity layer for the next generation connectivity layer to build digital cities. 5G is here, as we heard in this conference in Korea and other parts of the world. But the expectations around 5G are quite high, both from governments, same kind of scenario modeling approach that Shell has used and many people now use for business scenario analysis. We work together with BCG, their practice based in Europe, to model what would it take to build 5G infrastructures in these mega cities. Mega cities meaning cities with more than 10 million plus population, and many cities across Asia, and most of the mega cities around the world actually across Asia. We found that in these kind of mega city archetypes, under current assumptions about revenue trends, spectrum allocations, regulatory conditions, the way we build infrastructure, the CapEx and OpEx level required to meet the traffic demand in 2025 will be 3 to 4 times higher. And similar results have been published, by example, DBS Research, looking at the infrastructure deployments across Asia. So what can we do about this? I think there are a number of levers that can be pulled to reduce this envelope. In the next panel, which focuses on where to put your money, I'm sure that panel will look at the investment and business levers for it. I want to look at the more regulatory related levers that can be used to reduce this cost envelope. So number one, as we heard in the first panel, one of the key inputs into building infrastructure is spectrum. So there's a question about more spectrum as well as the cost for that spectrum. Number 2, backhaul deployment. We heard about fiberization. There are also other innovations happening in terms of using microwave technology and in-band backhaul to serve the more densified base station architecture in 5G. Number 3, voluntary network sharing. Many people talked about infrastructure sharing and deepening that sharing. We in GSMA welcome and promote the ability for operators to share networks in a voluntary manner. And I think the extent of sharing might get deeper, but it also has to be balanced with the impact of competition in the market. There are a number of studies published by us and various others that look at the number of networks versus the level of investments in market. And we find that it's an inverted U-curve, and the top of that U-curve is somewhere between 3 to 4 infrastructure players. So yes, there needs to be a deeper level of sharing, but I think that should be voluntary, and it should be also considered in light of other aspects such as continuous sites and small cells. Over the last 4 generations of deploying technology, we have pretty much used the kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of macro sites. So further sites that we require would be hard to source and might be expensive. And this challenge is multiplied by a factor of 2 or 3 or 1.2, depending on whom you believe, when it comes to small cells. So what can be done? So I think we need an infrastructure deployment framework, both from the operator's strategy point of view, as well as from a policy point of view. And I think that framework needs to capture these aspects. So I want to lay out 5 principles which I think are important. So number 1, every country should adopt a national mobile planning code. Many countries have done so in this region. I'll talk about that on my next slide. And number 2, the planning process has to be streamlined. We earlier heard the chairman of the MCMC talking about maybe it takes 6 months to get a planning application. Maybe you have to fill 20 forms in some states to get site approval. And it might cost close to $15,000 to $20,000 to get a site up and running. And I think that process has to be streamlined, particularly for small cells. I think there needs to be a regime which is really light touch in terms of getting planning approval and also the costs of that site. Number 3, consistent and transparency in relation to fees. We heard from EDOTCO's presentation that there will be a large number of sites. The operator's current focus when it comes to deliberations between the mobile industry and government in the context of deploying a new generation technology, whether it's 2G, 3G, 4G, has been primarily around spectrum, because that is the external input that is costly and out of the control of the operator. But what we hear from our members across different parts of the world, as if you look at 5G, where there will be also a large number of sites, the cost of site will also be a key supply input cost driver and needs to be managed. And number 4, facilitate access to sites, whether it's rights of way to build backhaul towards the site, or whether it is getting access to street furniture, such as lampposts or bus shelters or street benches. There needs to be a regime in place to help operators to find these sites in an easier manner. And finally, the question around environmental assessments. In some parts of the world, there is concern that with this densified level of networks, whether there will be any health concerns related to consumers. And I just want to say this, that there is a large number of scientific research on the impact of radiation from cell sites. There is an international commission that looks across this evidence and then sets safeguard limits. So there is a regime under which sites are deployed and operators have to comply with it. And we encourage all the countries to adapt these limits as much as possible. So although those principles are in place, implementing these can be also very challenging, because in many countries these are delegated down to the local level, and therefore there needs to be not just partnership horizontally between different players, but also collaboration vertically from national governments to state governments to local authorities. So we also need some kind of a vertical policy collaboration if we want to really put these principles in place. And we are indeed witnessing those kind of policy actions to reform and streamline the planning framework in the context of 5G. And I want to walk across the world and show you some examples so you can take something away from this session. So let me start with the United States. The Federal Communication Commission published what's known as the 5G Fast Plan to deploy 5G quickly in the United States. And one of the key elements of that plan is what's known as a small cell order. So it adopted a ruling under the powers it already has to cap the fees that can be charged by the different United States entities, so the different states, given it's a federal system. And it also set a time limit for those applications. So there is a 60-day and 90-day period, a shot clock system, by which the state authorities should agree to the planning approval or it's deemed approved. The cost, and it also adopted a cost-based fees for small cells. And primarily it's not a rental fee, but it's an application fee. So it's $500 for 5 applications, and then $250 of recurring fee. That's the cap. And different states, if they want to, can adopt a lower fee. And some states have indeed gone that far. So Nashville, the state known for music, it has adopted a regime whereby you don't really need any prior approval for installing sites. And maybe there is no correlation, but I just want to also note that when Amazon was deciding where to locate its warehouse in the United States, and it had this kind of open bidding process with different states, it finally chose Nashville as the state where it will locate its new Customer Excellence Center. But I also want to note, just for reasons of transparency, that some states have legally challenged this ruling by the Federal Communication Commission, and there are ongoing cases in the United States to determine whether the FCC has the authority to impose this ruling. If we move to Brazil, last month, the Brazil has put forward a proposal in its Congress to adopt its antenna law to codify a system of what they call positive silence, effectively deemed approval. So they have now set a period of 60 days within which local authorities have to approve the site planning, otherwise it would be considered as approved. That's significantly different to the 180 days that it currently takes in Brazil for operators to get planning approval. If I move across to the European Union, Europe created a new telecom framework 12 months ago. One of the key features of that framework is it prevents competent authorities, meaning public authorities, from charging for small cell installations. So it has adopted what's known as a light deployment regime for small cells. And then if I cite something quite recent that has happened in the last few weeks in the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom reformed its planning rules in 2017 to make it faster and easier to deploy sites. And it has recently issued a consultation, which is ongoing at the moment, to further reform the planning regime, including proposals to remove the need for prior approval for certain sites and allowing operators to increase the mast height to have a wider coverage with 5G technology that will be deployed at higher frequencies. Then if I move to this region, in India already the Department of Telecommunications had enacted right-of-way rules that set deadlines for applications of 60 days and administrative costs only for that applications which are not to exceed 10,000 rupees. In Korea, the country that everybody talks about in terms of 5G, there are policy changes happening to improve access, to facilitate access to other utilities. So utilities such as street works, as well as to intelligent transport system type utilities. And finally, in Singapore, there was a code known as the COPIF code, which was related to installation of telecommunication facilities, which was last updated in 2013. And it was updated again in December 2018 to make it easier, cheaper and faster for operators to deploy mobile installations. And one of the key features of that is rooftops, including on private residential buildings, should be made available for Singaporean operators to deploy base stations, and there will be no fees charged for it, even if the building is owned by a private landlord. So I just leave with that kind of thoughts about this area. We believe that in the context of 5G, in addition to spectrum, infrastructure policy is one of the key areas where both the mobile industry as well as the policymakers should focus on. It is really a low-hanging fruit in terms of the kind of intellectual thinking that needs to be done to kind of make these changes. And what we see is that there are changes happening across the world. So the number of examples I painted here, all leading countries thinking or have already launched 5G networks. So they are learning from the examples and reforming the system. And we encourage all the other countries around the world to learn from that, to be aware of their local sensitivities around the way power has been devolved across the different governmental structures. But we see there are best practice examples to follow, and we'll be very happy to work with the mobile industry, with infrastructure providers, and with government stakeholders, as we are doing across different parts of the world, to bring best practice knowledge and advice to reform their planning system. With that, thank you very much for listening.